Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. My name is AJay back with yet another anatomy and physiology video for you all. And today we're going to be looking at specifically the lymphatic system. And of course, the lesson topic is going to be on the major organs of the lymphatic system. We're going to be moving on from that lymphatic system overview, looking at the basics of the lymphatic system after we looked at some of the lymphatic structures, the flow of lymph, the process in which it transfers through the body, and some of the major lymphatic structures. But now we're going to take a look at some of the major organs that also play a role in the lymphatic system and actually house these smaller minor lymphatic structures. But before we jump into today's lesson, please make sure you do four things. Please make sure to smash that subscribe button if you haven't already on our YouTube channel. Please make sure to like this video as well. Drop that like down below. Also, please make sure to hit that post notification bell, that little bell icon right next to that subscribe button, so you don't miss out on any of our channel's latest uploads and you stay up to date with our newest releases. Also, feel free to utilize that comment section as well. We do pay attention to all of your comments, such as feedback, maybe questions and suggestions for future videos. All of that is, we absolutely appreciate it, and we will try and get to respond to you either through comments or through private via private mediums if you want to give us your email or something privately, and I will show you our email at the end. But just make sure to reach out to us with some general statements for the greater good of everyone, just some questions and some suggestions for future videos. We really appreciate it. All right, so now that's out of the way, now that you've done all four of those things, let's take a look at the topic, as I said before. So the objective of today's lesson, and as you can see, it's the major organs of the lymphatic system, part one. This section of the system will be divided into two separate video lessons. This is a rather larger section of essentially lessons and content in general, because the organs of the lymphatic system aren't just entirely meant for the lymphatic system, but we will be covering what those organs are and how exactly they play a role specifically to the lymphatic system. So there are quite a few organs, and I did want to break it up into bite-sized chunks for you all, so you're not overwhelmed within one video. So there will be a part 2 video coming out right after this, going over the 3 other organs that I will not be covering in this video, and I will show you exactly what those are. So the objective for this lesson, so in this lesson, we'll be looking at all of the major organs, and then we'll be diving into specifically 3 involved in the lymphatic system, along with their relative functions. So I'll give you their relative functions, general functions, but we're mainly going to focus on how they actually contribute to the lymphatic system. What are some of their properties that attach and align with the lymphatic system? And what are some of its general structures, content, what it looks like, and I'll show you some diagrams of them as well, so that you better understand not only their location but their structure and how their structure actually helps them with their own function. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. All right, starting off, we're going to take an overview of what exactly these lymphatic organs would be like. So the major organs of the lymphatic system include the spleen, the appendix, Pyres Patches, the thymus, tonsils, and bone marrow. I'm sure you've heard of a few of these already, but the 3 that we're going to be diving into in this lesson are the spleen, the appendix, and the Pyres Patches. Now, I'm sure you may have heard about the spleen and the appendix before, and the Pyres Patches might be something that's not as entirely familiar, but it is located within an organ as a semi-organ within one of the most common organs, something that you would know in the digestive system. But I won't spoil it. You guys will have to wait until the later on in this video to figure that out. But thymus, tonsils, and bone marrow, those 3 other organs of the lymphatic system, are actually going to be located in our next video, part 2 of the major organs of the lymphatic system. And as I just included a sub note in white, lymph nodes are also important lymphatic organs. You might be a little bit confused. Aren't they like the most important lymphatic organ? Well, I just wanted to put out there, they actually are one of the most unique lymphatic organs. They are the lymph nodes. They're considered to be minor organs, but they're still major organs of the system, and they are actually the smallest organs in the entire body. They're very important with your immune response. Like I recapped in previous videos, like when you go to the doctor's office, if a doctor actually wants to check if you have a fever, the very first thing that they look for is inflamed lymph nodes, because those lymph nodes are very important in clearing out the fluids in your body, and it can actually come across many pathogens and signal feverish tendencies and possible illnesses within your body, some pathogens or bacteria. So lymph nodes are actually one of the most important organs, but I actually went through an entire section of the lymph nodes in my previous video on the major structures of the lymphatic system and the flow of lymph and lymph circulation. So in all 3 of those videos, I actually went through in depth exactly what the lymph nodes are. I gave you definitions, and I actually showed you examples of what they are. So please reference those. Lymph nodes are essentially your small, like they're the size of essentially a lima bean, but they're very important in cleaning out your lymph all throughout your body. They're located all throughout in clusters. So just as a quick summary, if you didn't know yet. So all of these organs are involved in the process of transporting, filtering, and flushing out lymph throughout the body, essentially. So, like the spleen and appendix, they work differently from, say, for example, the Pyres Patches and bone marrow. However, they still have one entire objective, and that's the whole purpose of anatomy and physiology. We're looking for systems that have one desired purpose, one objective in mind, and that they work together or have similar characteristics to be characterized underneath that given system. So in this case, they're all combining together in order to influence lymph circulation, filtering, and the flushing out of lymph itself. And as you can see here on the body on the body diagram that I've just shown you, the lymphatic system is composed of your lymphatic structures, which are your lymphatic vessels. Your lymphatic vessels are located all across your body, essentially, so it can circulate it better, and it's also attached directly to your veins and your veins and your venules, essentially in your cardiovascular system, in order to utilize that pressure to pump lymph all throughout the body, just like blood, and it only pumps in one direction. So as you can see, those lymphatic vessels are located all across the body. However, lymphatic organs also help and also contain many of these channels within themselves in order to help increase this process and contribute in their own manners. So let's move on to our very first organ. I know you guys are curious. Let's take a look specifically at what these organs are. I'm going to go into complete depth with you all and try and explain it to the best of my ability, and I'm sure you guys will understand, because this really was a struggle for me when I started learning the lymphatic system. A lot of these complex terms I couldn't understand, but through my own notes and through my guided research, I was able to combine good note sheets for myself that would later help me make these videos for you all. So without further ado, let's start off with our first organ, and that's going to be the spleen. So we're going to start off with the spleen function. I'm going to introduce to you what the spleen function is, and this is part one, the first slide of that. So the spleen function, what is the spleen responsible for? The spleen is responsible for the filtration and the so-called screening of blood utilizing proteins from lymph and fiber filtration to remove harmful bacteria and pathogens. Essentially, the lymph is responsible in filtering out your blood, taking that blood and utilizing a system called lymph proteins, where you take lymph and the proteins within lymph and utilize it to clean and clear out your blood of any harmful bacteria and pathogens, and then that's later flushed out. So what's happening here is the spleen is essentially not only filtering out your blood, but it's also utilizing that lymph to filter out the blood as well. So white blood cells are manufactured here, such as lymphocytes, monocytes, and neutrophils. So you have to keep in mind, when you're dealing with these pathogens and these foreign bacteria, you have to make sure that you're actually killing them off. So essentially, these white blood cells will be found in lymph, and that lymph will then be mixed with the blood inside, and it'll be filtered essentially in this process, killing out pathogens and bacteria and excess nutrients and materials that are not needed within the blood. So these are the three white blood cells, as I just mentioned: the lymphocytes, monocytes, and neutrophils. So the first type is the lymphocytes, and I have mentioned the monocytes and lymphocytes, but neutrophils is something new, just for the spleen. But the lymphocytes are responsible in the detection of pathogens and bacteria. So there's type of dendritic cells. Essentially, they'll detect for pathogens and bacteria. They'll attach onto them, and then the monocyte they'll send out signals after attaching on, and then they'll leave the premises. And then the monocytes will actually attach onto these harmful pathogens and bacteria, and they'll kill them. Essentially, they're the largest, and they will essentially kill these bacteria. They're the white blood cells responsible in the active response. And then the lymphocytes are passive response that identify what are some pathogens and bacteria. They essentially keep it in something called your cellular memory, and they keep that memory in order to identify which exact cells are pathogens that the body knows, and they'll keep them essentially to make sure that they know exactly how to respond. And then, of course, you have your neutrophils, which just reduce inflammation after bacteria is killed, because once you kill bacteria, you're having a massive reaction. I know it might seem small on a minor level, but since you have so many white blood cells, and a lot of pathogens might even go through your body on a daily basis, there's a lot of killing and destruction involved in that process, killing off those bad cells. So there's a lot of inflammation. So these neutrophils essentially help in reducing that inflammation. And just as another note, the spleen is largely responsible, just to summarize, the spleen is largely responsible in the filtration and immune response within the lymphatic system. So it helps filtering out blood with the lymphatic proteins, clearing out that blood of pathogens and bacteria, and then utilizing the white blood cells that it houses and actually produces in order to kill off those pathogens and reduce the inflammation that essentially occurs. And then afterwards, that blood will then be utilized after. There's a certain technique in which the spleen controls the amount of blood that is released and taken in order to control the blood volume, how much blood is actually being released back into the cardiovascular system. So this is a very, very vital organ within the body. And as you can see here, right here, I just wanted to put it out there just as a little identification here. So right here on the left-hand side, we have our lymphocytes. And versus our given monocytes. And an easy way to actually remember this is that it actually is a difference on the surfaces of the lymphocytes and monocytes. When you're comparing them, they definitely do have a difference in size, but appearance-wise, the difference between them is the fact that the lymphocyte actually has something called your micro receptors, and these microreceptors are essentially responsible for sending out signals of any foreign pathogens and calling an immune response and also storing that cellular data. So it has to do with signaling. And then the monocytes, they actually have these little wispy attaching strings to them. They're called it's a very complex term, but I will. Anita does go into depth with that in her biology videos, and I will also go into depth with that in our immune system videos to come. But essentially, they're responsible in attaching to foreign pathogens. I like to call them little wisps. I call them wisps. But they're responsible in attaching to foreign pathogens. They're a little bit wispier, a little bit more clingy, and they help attach to foreign pathogens and essentially destroy those foreign pathogens and bacteria. All right, now let's move on to spleen function part 2, and we're going to look at some other responsibilities of the spleen. So, the spleen is oftentimes considered to be one of the filthiest organs, but because it does the dirty work, it actually becomes very important to the entirety of the body, not just in the lymphatic system, but every other system essentially, because everything's affected by lymph and blood, and it affects other systems and their own processes as well. So, the spleen is considered to be the filthiest organ because of the fact that it actually houses it houses and decomposes dead blood cells and immunizing cells found in blood by composing them into proteins and other needed materials. So it's really just a graveyard essentially, and it utilizes those not necessarily bodies, those dead corpses of these cells to actually construct and produce, actually good things for the body, such as proteins that need to be involved in synthesis and making new materials and new nutrients that need to be transported back into the body. And like I said here, it is very vital for the body. It's a vital organ. So the difference between a non-vital and a vital organ is the fact that a vital organ is something that you do need to live with, and a non-vital is not something that you don't need to live with. You don't necessarily need it to live. The spleen is very difficult to be transplanted, but it can be transplanted. However, you do need to have a spleen within the body. It's very difficult to have an automated one. A spleen must be present. But if you have something like the appendix, which I will get into at the end of this video, the appendix is something that is non-vital because it's not necessary to be within the body. And so on and so forth. Like your kidneys. You don't need 2 kidneys. You actually only need 1. Therefore, it's still technically a vital organ, but it's not vital that you have 2 kidneys. All right, so let's go back to our spleen here. So like I said, it's essentially decomposes your dead blood cells that are not necessarily alive anymore. They're not good, healthy blood cells to be put back into the cardiovascular system as the spleen controls them, houses them, filters them out, and composes them into proteins and other needed materials. And it essentially can take blood that lacks nutrients and transport it to areas of severe swelling and abrasions to protect healthy blood, essentially. So, as I was saying, it decomposes these dead blood cells into essentially new proteins and needed materials, and it can also have an immune response in certain times, when essentially when you get a cut, or if you get injured and you start to bleed a lot, or you have an abrasion on the skin. In areas of severe swelling and abrasions, it can essentially put out this bad quality of blood that is immature, essentially, or just not as good, bad blood, essentially, to those areas, and make sure that it protects that area as well, and make sure that only the bad blood is released out of that wound. Just like when you have a nosebleed, only bad blood is actually being released so that you don't compromise the healthy, good blood within your body. So it can also have that response as well. And some cells that are decomposed in the actual spleen itself include erythrocytes, which are special types of blood cells that are carbon dioxide carriers. And these carbon dioxide carriers obviously help with the transporting of carbon dioxide outside of the body and carrying it back to the lungs so that it can be exhaled. So those are examples of some of the blood cells that are decomposed and turned into, it has to do with protein synthesis in that manner. And also, the spleen can also self-transfuse and stabilize blood volume by controlling blood release. So let me just explain that in layman's terms, essentially. The spleen can control its input and output of blood, which controls the volume of blood entirely in the entire body. It's very important in blood volume control. So if we have our blood cells here and just our blood content here, it can control volume. It controls the volume of intake of blood, and it also controls the volume released back into the vascular system. So what happens is it has something called your artery, just as a essentially a vein that goes into the actual spleen itself, and it enters the spleen. The blood enters the spleen, and it controls the volume that is actually being taken in by the spleen itself. And this has to do with the necessity of, say, for example, if you're in colder weather, blood actually goes and constricts closer towards your organs and away from your skin. That's where your skin starts to turn pale and a certain shade of blue even sometimes. But it can also control the release of the blood when you actually need to release blood back near to the skin, and actually control your blood volume, increase it if you're in higher temperatures, lower temperatures, if you're actually exercising. All those things are involved. So it can control how much blood is actually being flowed through your actual your vascular system, and it can control the pace in which it does so. So those are other effects that it also has, just aside from the lymphatic system in general. Also a part of the cardiovascular system, and you can check that out as a part of some of Anita's videos in the anatomy and physiology course. All right, moving on. Now let's take a look at some of the spleen, some of the characteristics of spleen structure. So it's considered as the largest lymphatic organ and is located within the diaphragm. That's essentially your chest area. You can think of your rib cage as your central point of your diaphragm. It's located a little bit above your top. It's essentially located from your top abdomen, your top to abdomen, ab muscles upwards, where those ribs essentially end. The rib cage located within the rib cage, and it's located in the upper left cavity of the body, which is also known as the hypochondriac region. So it actually is sitting near towards the stomach itself. It's located right in that area and in the top left cavity of it. It has an oval-shaped appearance and is designed to have a large network of connective fibers, which are also used for screening. And screening is just the filtration of blood in general. Those connective fibers helping trap pathogens so that lymph can actually come and filter out that blood and circulate out towards the vascular system. It has red and white blood pulp, which contains 3 types of WBCs. Of course, those are 3 types of white blood cells: are lymphocytes, monocytes, and neutrophils, and red blood cells, but not at a consistent amount. So it has red and white blood pulp, which is essentially those clusters of blood, and it helps in producing white blood cells and red blood cells. But red blood cells are not always at a consistent amount. Like I said, it controls the amount of blood that is passing through the spleen for different reasons, like difference in temperature, exercising, or if you actually have an injury, things like that. It controls the different amount of red blood cells that are being produced and actually housing as much blood within the spleen. So it's not always consistent, but it is at a healthier amount, tries to keep you at a healthy amount to survive. And the spleen is considered to be a transplantable organ. So yes, you can transplant your spleen, and yes, it can obtain those very same functions when you do transplant it. However, it can be considered to be invasive, essentially. So although you're just transplanting the spleen, there's a lot of other organs being exposed, and the spleen itself. So it's something that has to be done with lots of care. And if you don't know what transplantable means, like I said before, you're just taking it out of someone essentially, and you're housing that organ. That normally people are organ donors after they pass away. They sign on their normally it's signified on their driver's license that they are organ donors, and once they pass away, they allow for their organs to be harvestable, so that people who actually need those organs, they can transplant them back into their body. Of course, transplanting should not be your first option, but yes, it is reliable in responsible surgeries. So as you can see here, this is where the spleen is. It's located essentially in that top left corner, as I said, right next to the stomach, lying right next to the stomach, and right above the small and large intestine and colon. And this is essentially what the spleen looks like. It looks very similar to the kidneys itself. However, it's much more ovular shaped rather than essentially kidney bean shaped like a kidney. And it's a larger slab of meat. And if you ever ate spleen inside of an animal, actually, it's one of the largest in protein because it does produce so much protein from those decomposing cells. So that's another cool fact as well. All right, moving on. Now we're going to take a look at our second of three major organs of the lymphatic system part 1 video. So we have our appendix, and we're going to specifically take a look at our appendix function. So the appendix has a minor role in its immune response and function, as it does store white blood cells. So it does store white blood cells, and it can help with immune response and killing off those foreign bacteria and pathogens, but it mainly serves to store good bacteria and enzymes in its compartment. So it's considered as a storage place for good nutrients and materials that are needed through the body. So you might be thinking, how exactly does this contribute to the lymphatic system? Well, it can help replenish lymph. Like we said, lymph passes through all the organs of the body, helps drain out all of those organs and purify blood. But when it passes through, lymph does not only clear out these organs, but it also replenishes itself. And that specifically happens with the appendix. That's its main responsibility now. As the appendix, it can help replenish lymph that passes through the organ by supplying it with stored bacteria and nutrients that are lacking in the body. Like if you need extra glucose, if you need extra certain types of chemicals within the body, more salt concentration within the body, or less salt concentration within the body. You can have those essentially opposing effects that can be found within the appendix to be transported throughout the body. But the main concern with the appendix is that if it is blocked, the appendix can cause a severe case of appendicitis, which is one of the most infamous diseases, which is only curable through surgical removal. However, just to put it out there, removing the appendix is actually a non-vital function. You do not need your appendix to survive. You don't need it within your body or transplant it into your body after having it surgically removed. It's not necessary. So, like I said before, the appendix is no longer required for humans, as it will only slow down immune response. Essentially, when you lose your appendix, it only slows down the immune response. The appendix helps with the increase of your immune response. And it used to be, this is one of the most popular theories, is that it used to be necessary, the appendix, when humans ate raw meat. Back to the times when we were Neanderthals and where we were prehistoric times, during the Stone Ages, we essentially ate raw meat a lot of the times before fire was actually discovered, and cooked meat started to become more fathomable than raw meat, and people started to eat cooked meat more than raw meat. And of course, nowadays, most of our diets is consistent of cooked meat other than certain cleaned raw meats. So when you're eating raw meat, there's a lot of bacteria in raw meat, and it takes a lot more enzymes to actually break down that raw meat. So in that process, your appendix essentially released those enzymes that were needed to break it down. But we're no longer in necessity of that. A lot of us just eat cooked meat nowadays, and a lot of us are just vegetarians, so we don't have that main function for the appendix. All right, and that's an actual diagram of the appendix. The appendix is actually that small wispy thing at the end with that little connection junction area. The appendix is actually one of the smallest major organs in the body, and it's so minute, but it can cause severe issues such as appendicitis. That's the only time where it's actually going to be diagnosable as an issue or actually have severe impact. It can affect the small and large intestines, which affects your entire digestive system and would require surgery. All right, moving on to the appendix structure. So the appendix is located in between, or the meeting place of the large and small intestine. So it's located in that junction where the small and large intestines meet together. And it is one of the smallest organs in the body, as I said, as a major concern with the appendix is appendicitis and a slower immune response. It has many rivets and crevices along it, so it's very riveted, just like your brain is, where good bacteria and nutrients are stored to be carried by lymph. So it essentially uses those crevices to house the bacteria that can then be carried by lymph when it transports through that organ, through the large and small intestines, back to the rest of the body. And removing the appendix through surgery is considered not vital, but it can run the risk of being invasive as other organs are exposed in the surgery as well. So essentially, the surgery process of it is somewhat risky because you are exposing some of those larger organs, but the actual removal of the appendix, successful removal, will not be vital. Will be considered non-vital because it won't affect the entirety of the body and its general functions too much to the extent in which you have to change your lifestyle and you're at a health risk. And just to show you here, of course, we have the colon there at the bottom part, in which actually helps with your passing number 2 in your digestive system. Then you have your large and small intestines, and exactly where they meet, that little section right here. Let me draw it out here, just circling it here. This section is actually where the junction right here between the large and small intestines actually occurs. This is just a diagram in which it's actually removed out from that place so you can actually see it. But that's the appendix, and it's located between the large and small intestine meeting each other. And yeah, it's responsible for the storage. It's a very simple organ, but it is very beneficial. It helps you. It's a very proactive organ in the lymphatic system, so it's very important to address. All right, and for our final organ, our very final, I'd like to consider it a minor organ, but it is a major organ. Essentially, it's called. I'd like to consider it as a lesser major organ because it's not like your typical organ. It's actually a cluster of tissues. It's not your official organ, but it can be considered. It is biologically considered, but I like to think of it as a lesser major organ, just because it's tissue, really. But it does have similar functions to organs. So, Pyres patches. These are small groups or clusters of lymphatic tissue located on the interior and exterior of the ileum region of the small intestines. So this is patches of tissue that have the same response as lymph nodes, very similar to lymph nodes, that are located on the ileum region of the small intestines. And just to give you a brief description, the ileum region is where the small and large intestine intersect each other, and this is where calories are actually absorbed through digestion. So once you start digesting your food, this is the last place where calories are absorbed back into the body as fuel and energy. So these patches are the first responders to pathogens within the small intestine, and they release white blood cells and dendritic cells to kill them off. They're very vital. They also, of course, help in producing lymph and help in the flow of lymph throughout the small intestines specifically, in order to clear out those bacteria and those pathogens. Because the small intestines and the large intestines are very important, involving your actual absorption and the process in which you differentiate your food calories, the calories that are needed within the body, and your solid waste. So it's very important. There's a lot of bacteria in those areas. Bacteria has to be maintained. Good bacteria has to be kept and essentially circulated throughout the body, and bad bacteria has to be killed off with that immune response. And it's egg-shaped tissue. That's essentially how it looks. It's very egg-shaped. It's just like your regular tissue, and it's very similar to lymph nodes, but it's less mobile. So it looks a little bit similar to lymph nodes, less depth to them because they're not essentially separate organs. Only the cluster of tissues is considered a patch, an organ, a Pyres patch. And of course, it's named after a scientist, but I will also mention that in our later videos to come who that scientist was and who all these scientists were in the lymphatic system and anatomy and physiology in general. So yeah, so it's very similar to lymph nodes in that function. It also helps filtering out and giving immune response with lymph, but it, of course, it's less mobile. It's essentially attached to certain parts of the intestine in clusters. And of course, as you can see here, this is a inner lining of the small intestine, and these right here are your Pyres patches. And they're just clusters of tissue, essentially. And that tissue is, of course, lymphatic, specifically lymphatic tissue. All right, everyone. So that'll be it for today's lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed. I had a blast making this video, and I'm really passionate about this lymphatic system. So I hope you all can get through with this through these concepts, really understand and grasp this lesson without trying too hard, because that's my job. I'm trying to make this as easy to understand for all of you, so that you got all can thrive, whether it's Science Olympiad competition or it's your AP classroom for your anatomy and physiology classroom, or even AP biology. All those things, this does come into play. So thank you all for tuning in. Like I said before, this has been the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. So please make sure to like and subscribe, turn on post notifications, and leave a comment down below. Check out our website at www.ecoreacademy.org. We have full unlocked access to quizzes, note sheets, and also full organized course studies going along with each and every single one of our videos. Many resources there for you. It literally resembles an entire course for you all to go through, the full package, everything that you need to understand, lesson checks, notes, and of course the videos with their own descriptions. And we even have a frequently asked questions section and a contact us section if you have any questions at all for any of our newest teachers at this platform, not just me and Anita, but we have many new teachers at this platform as well. So you can even put that in on our website. All you have to do is make an account for free, and you'll have full unlocked access to everything, even progress checks. Also, feel free to email us at eCoreAcademy@gmail.com if you have any questions, or if you just want to reach out to us. And please check out all of our socials in the description box below at Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We just recently added our TikTok account, and in our TikTok, we're going to be adding really cool videos. Nothing, it doesn't really have to do with anything academic, just really fun videos to put out there, put eCoreAcademy out there, and see that you guys can also have fun with this, just to distract you from your day-to-day lives, and just little videos for you all to watch, and just have a laugh at, or just really enjoy, and just think about, essentially. Really cool, funny videos. And then, of course, all of our other social media accounts, you can check those out, see what kind of interesting content we have there for eCoreAcademy, and things that can help you there as well. You can also use those mediums to share all of our videos and share our content. Once again, everyone, this has been AJ Raj. I had a blast making this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.